Hey, what is up guys? This is Norman3000. Okay, first things first, this is more of a commentary rather than a review. I'm going to create chapters so you can jump to the sections that might interest you. For the most part, this video will include 4 chapters. How the Vita made me fall in love with gaming again, how the Vita performs in 2024 relative to other retro handhelds, why I think the PS Vita may not be right for you, and some closing thoughts. It has been 6 years since I bought the PS Vita version 2, and it has been my on and off handheld. Back in 2018, the retro handheld market is not as robust as it is now, so I had little choices. The default sentiment was, get a PSP, which to some extent still ring true 6 years later. By then, I already had a Nintendo DS, a new 3DS, and a V1 Switch, which was a Switch with the family. I actually can't recall why I bought the PS Vita. I did not have a PSP growing up as I chose the DS, so I don't particularly have any hankering to play any PSP games. I do remember it was a bit after lunch and the meetup was a milk tea place in Fisher Mall. Checking the games installed, I do remember playing some games, but I played this way after 2018. What I did remember was the PS Vita being my gateway to playing games again. Back in the early days of the pandemic in 2020, I just finished God of War 2018 and Spider-Man on PS4. I did not have the Switch with me back then, so I picked up the Vita. I was just browsing and I opened up Danganronpa. I fell in love with it immediately, and it gave me a little jolt back into the joys of gaming. It was also this time that Animal Crossing on the Switch came out, and a popular alternative to it was Stardew Valley. It has been quite a while since I played a Harvest Moon type game, and to my surprise, Stardew Valley was available on the PS Vita. Despite the multiple crashes on the Vita, I still loved it. I actually loved it so much, I bought a Switch V2 and bought Stardew Valley there as well. After Stardew Valley, I played more games on the Switch like Guacamelee, Bloodstained, Hollow Knight, Hades, and Ender Lilies. By this time, the Vita went back to the drawer, but I still pick it up from time to time. By 2022, I saw another game called Papers, Please, and was surprised it was on the Vita. This is another great game that surprisingly found its way into the Vita. Papers, Please is a great game and you should play it if you own a system that can play it. It was also around this time when I got back into playing visual novels. Starting with the Great Ace Attorney on the Switch, after I finished that game, I wanted more visual novels. I went on to play Uno, both Famicom Detective Clubs, Root Film, and World End Syndrome. I wanted to play more, and you know which system has many visual novels? Yes, that's right, it's the PlayStation Vita. Earlier on my Danganronpa playing days, I've added an English patch Fruits of Grisaya, but I hadn't really played it. I figured now was the time, and it was great. This is the final leg of this chapter, as Grisaya led to another ill-advised purchase, and it is the AYN Loki Zero. I bought this one because I wanted to play visual novels uncensored. The AYN Loki Zero then led me to find this dual boot feature to GelOS, which opened up my world to retro gaming handhelds. Then I bought the Powkid X55, and then a few retro handhelds and videos later, here we are now. In a way, I owe it all to a random afternoon back in 2018 when I decided to buy a PS Vita for reasons I can't remember. And because of that, I owe the PS Vita a lot. Let me say it again, I love my PlayStation Vita. Okay, so now let's get into the device itself. Since this is a Sony-built handheld, I expected a well-built device, and it is. Even 10 years later, it still looks great. At the front, you have your face buttons, D-pad, analog sticks, start select, a camera, and a PS button. I actually like the placement of buttons here, as if you want to play retro games, the D-pad is correctly placed. At the back, you have a touch-sensitive panel and another camera. At the top, you have your shoulder buttons, power, volume, and your game card slot. At the bottom, you see a micro USB port, an earphone jack, and a proprietary card slot that was indubitably one of Vita's cause of downfall. The latter aside, here is where we get to see the first con of the PS Vita, the micro USB port. Don't get me wrong, micro USB is not hard to find, but this is another cable to lug around. I know there are tutorials out there that converts this port to USB-C, but I'm not really handy and I don't want to mess my system up. Next, we move on to ergonomics. The Vita by itself is fine. It is big enough not to cramp your hands, but buying a grip gives you much better ergonomics and it gives you R2 and L2 functionality using buttons. If I compare this to any retro handhelds that I have, and I have the X55, the RGB30, the Miyoo Mini Plus, the Anbernic RG353V and 35XXH, the PS Vita with the grips is the best one ergonomically. When it comes to battery life, 6 years later and I'm still very impressed. Granted, I don't play this a lot, but the standby time of this is insane. You can put this to sleep for days and have little battery drain. When you do play games, I find the maximum to be about 5 hours when playing retro games. When playing PS Vita, the best I can do was 4 hours. I am not complaining about these numbers. I actually find them very exceptional. Remember that this is a 10-year-old device, and mine is a second-hand 6-year-old one. Those numbers are very impressive. Checking out the screen, it's okay. This is the V2 model, so it does not have the colors of the OLED. I have made modifications on the registry editor to replicate the OLED screen, but it's not really the best. The bezels may be too big as well in this day and age. Again, do not be offended that I'm not jumping for joy about the screen. This is not a bad screen. It is a relatively good one. It's just that when you use OLED phones or Samsung phones for that matter, and you have the X55, the Switch, and the AYN Loki Zero, it's hard to get excited about this screen. So we come to the performance. If you grew up with PSP and PS1, I think the PS Vita is a great retro handheld for you. I recently put up a video that plays about 70 PSP games on the PS Vita, and unsurprisingly, games run great on it. Apart from the stellar performance with the PSP and PS1, you also have the added bonus of the PS Vita library. And if you've navigated through a PSP or a PS3, 4, or 5, this software will feel like home. A hacked Vita also has some other features, my favorites being Adrenaline, Vita Shell, and the PKGJ. Adrenaline is your PSP and PS1 player, Vita Shell is your command center, you can connect through a cable or FTP, install VPKs, and browse or modify files. The PKGJ is the best, as it lets you download games from PS1, PSP, and PS Vita. The library here is not complete, but this is a great feature to have. If you grew up with Sony, the PS Vita may just be the best handheld for you. So we come to the point where we discuss why the Vita may not be for you, and it is two things. First, non-Sony retro gaming and the price. Let's start with the former. For other retro systems, we have to step on the brakes here. If you jump from a retro handheld to a Vita, you will definitely notice the clunkiness of the UI, as this isn't as clean and simple as with GelOS. A bit of a disclaimer, I know that as of now, GelOS pulled out its software on GitHub, but this does not change the fact that navigating through GelOS is easier than it is on PS Vita. If you pick the Vita up to play retro games, you have to be prepared to do some extra work. While you can install most known emulators via a link on the description, you still need to install them and configure them individually. Alternatively, you can install RetroArch, but RetroArch is a pain to navigate through, especially for a newbie. Comparing this to a dedicated retro handheld where you basically turn on, choose a system, choose a game, the installation and configuration process of the PS Vita can be daunting. Yes, some people do enjoy the thrill of tinkering and making things work, but not everyone shares this sentiment. Not everyone will have the patience or know how to deal with any of this, and it might be a detriment for them to get a PS Vita. Let me give you a quick example. Say I want to play Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors on the Game Boy Advance. On the PowKiddy RGB30, I go to Game Boy Advance, and then select DBZ, and that's it. On the PlayStation Vita, I need to find the MGBA app. I need to scroll to the folder with my games. and then I select the games. That's more steps and it really takes away from the simplicity of just choosing a system and choosing a game. Not to mention that if you do end up choosing standalone emulators and not RetroArch, you mostly lose out on retro achievements. Something that I have loved with other retro handhelds. Some standalone emulators may have this, but this is additional setup for each emulator. And finally, as good as the PS Vita may be on paper, I do have to point out its last con, and that is the price. If you find this at about 3,000 pesos to 5,000, I think this is a good deal, but most of the time, it sells for about 6,000 pesos. I know that this is now considered a rare commodity, and all that law of supply and demand things, but I don't really think that this is the way to go if you want to play retro games. Prior to December 2023, I will always tell people that ask to get a PS Vita if they want a retro handheld. But now that I own retro handhelds, I came to realize that these are two different devices and not really interchangeable. Also note that if you do buy an unhacked Vita, you still need to put more work into hacking it. Yes, hacking the Vita now is very simple, but you still need to add all those emulators and configure them as mentioned earlier. That and the absurdly high entry price may not be worth it over just buying a cheaper retro handhelds that can play retro games out of the box. So, is the PS Vita right for you? As I mentioned earlier, if you grew up with the PS1 and the PSP, yes, this is a very good handheld for you. For other people, let's look at it like this. If you want to play PS Vita exclusive games and you want to play some older titles on the side, then yes, absolutely get a PS Vita. If you plan to play more PSP games, it might be better just to buy a PSP. 2,500 nets you a decent condition PSP, and it can emulate some retro systems like the NES, SNES, Game Boy Advance, and it can also play PS1. If you want to play PSP and some PS Vita on the side, check if the PS Vita game you want to play is ported on another platform that you already own. If it is present there, you might just want to consider buying that. If not, really consider if you can afford to drop 6,000 pesos and then a couple more hundreds if you decide to buy them legit. If yes, then go, buy the PS Vita. Otherwise, look elsewhere. Look, I'm not dunking on the PS Vita. I love mine and I have no intentions of letting it go. I even believe that this is still a great handheld even in 2024. When I did my PSP test, I discovered a lot of great PSP games and I plan to play them on the Vita rather than my other retro handhelds. However, I believe that this is a great handheld for someone like me, someone who already has it, someone who is willing to do all the extra work to make other retro systems run here. If you have the budget and the patience for it, you will have no regrets with the PS Vita, and you will probably agree that this is a great purchase even at 2024. Otherwise, take a step back and evaluate what it is that you want to play and check other options that are available to you. Remember, what works for me might not work for you, and what works for you might not work for me or other people. Unlike 6 years ago where the choices, or rather choice, was basically get a PSP, we now have a healthy amount of options out there, and I think this is a good thing as competition drives innovation. Who knows, with the resurgence of retro handhelds, Sony might decide to actually take a stab into a PS Vita 2 and not just the PlayStation Portal. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Consider helping the channel out by liking, sharing, and subscribing if you found this useful. This has been Norman3000. See you soon, and happy gaming!